If you're hearing this, Clara, don't trust the wolves. The recording crackled, thin and distorted, as if the forest itself were trying to swallow her father's voice, and Clara Bennett stood frozen in her small lab just outside Black Hollow, her fingers tightening around the old digital recorder she had found buried in a box of his field notes marked 30 years ago. Outside the window, the pines stretched for miles, dark and endless. The same forest that had taken him when she was 7 years old. The same forest the government now called a protected ecological anomaly, but the locals still whispered about as forbidden territory. She pressed play again, heart pounding against her ribs, the red timestamp flickering 3 minutes and 17 seconds, and her father's voice returned softer this time, edged with urgency. The land isn't what they think it is, it's alive in ways we don't understand. Before the audio dissolved into static, Clara had spent 2 decades studying environmental energy systems, earning her doctorate, publishing research, convincing herself that science could explain anything. Yet nothing in her training accounted for the strange pulsing readings her team had detected just 12 miles into the restricted zone, a rhythmic surge beneath the soil like a heartbeat measured at intervals too precise to be random. The federal grant described it as a geothermal anomaly, a potential clean energy breakthrough. But Clara recognized the coordinates immediately because they matched the faded map sketched in her father's handwriting. The map everyone had dismissed as the obsession of a man who vanished chasing myths. She remembered the night he left, boots by the door, a flashlight clipped to his belt, promising he would be back before sunrise, promising he had found something that could change everything, and how dawn came without him. Now 30 years later, she stood on the edge of the same forest with a survey tablet in one hand and his weathered journal in the other. The late September air cool at 60 degrees, the scent of pine and damp earth wrapping around her like memory. 12 miles from the nearest road, beyond the posted boundary markers, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, only that low vibration beneath her boots. And when her tablet flickered and recalibrated, she felt it in her chest too, a resonance that defied logic. She knelt, brushing aside fallen needles, revealing a symbol carved into stone, worn by time but unmistakable, the same crescent mark her father had drawn in the margins of his notes. She whispered his name without realizing it, and the air seemed to tighten, as if the forest were listening. What Clara did not know, what no one on her research team could have predicted, was that she was not alone within those 12 miles, because high along a ridge overlooking the forbidden land stood Adrian Hale, Alpha King of the Black Hollow Wolves, his silver gaze fixed on the lone figure moving through territory protected by an oath older than any federal boundary line. He had felt the disturbance the moment she crossed into the core, felt the ancient energy stir in response to her presence, and beneath the weight of his crown and the burden of his divided blood, something unexpected ignited, a recognition not of threat, but of destiny. As Clara rose to her feet and the ground beneath her pulsed once, bright and silent, like a heartbeat answering her own, the past she had chased for 30 years began to awaken, and somewhere between science and legend, between truth and warning, the fragile piece holding 2 worlds apart started to fracture. The vibration did not stop after she stood. It deepened, rolling outward in a slow pulse that made the fine hairs along Clara Bennett's arms rise despite the mild 62-degree afternoon. And when she glanced at her tablet again, the screen fractured into static before going completely black, as if something beneath the soil had reached up and silenced it. She drew a steady breath, reminding herself that electromagnetic interference was not a ghost, and that energy fields could disrupt equipment. Yet logic did not explain why the carved crescent beneath her palm felt warm, almost responsive, as though the stone had been waiting. 12 miles from the nearest paved road, with only a narrow dirt trail behind her and a research team expecting her back by dusk, she made a decision her rational mind would later question and stepped beyond the final boundary marker, into the heart of the restricted zone her father had circled in red ink. High above, unseen but unmistakably present, Adrian Hale watched from the ridge line where ancient oaks twisted against the sky, his posture still, his senses extended through forest and wind, and he felt the core answer her again, not in aggression but in recognition. a harmonic shift he had only experienced once before when he was a child standing beside his human mother as she told him that peace was not weakness. The council had warned him that human surveyors were mapping the outer territory, that investors from the nearest city were only weeks away from sending drilling equipment, and that any intrusion into the inner 12 miles should be met with immediate removal. Yet he did not give the order. Instead, he moved silently along the slope, covering ground with controlled precision, closing the distance between king and scientist until he could see her clearly through the branches, a young woman in hiking boots dusted with pine needles, her brown hair pulled back, her expression focused yet shadowed by something deeper than professional curiosity. Clara felt it before she saw him, the subtle shift in air pressure, the sense of being observed not with hostility but with intense awareness. And when she turned, she met silver eyes across 20 yards of filtered sunlight, eyes that reflected the forest light like polished metal. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke, the silence thick but not threatening, and Clara's first thought was not fear but familiarity, because those eyes mirrored the description her father had once written in the margin of his journal. The Guardian does not look like a monster. Adrian stepped forward into clearer view, his dark jacket blending with the trees, his voice steady and low when he finally broke the quiet. You are standing on land protected by an oath older than your government. And though his tone carried authority, it held no cruelty. Clara swallowed, her pulse loud in her ears, and lifted her chin with a steadiness born from 30 years of unanswered questions. My father stood here before me, she said, and he disappeared after discovering what is beneath this ground. The forest seemed to lean closer at her words, and Adrian felt the truth ripple through the core itself, because he remembered the man who had once walked this land without weapons, who had chosen silence over exploitation, and in that moment the fragile line between their worlds shifted, not toward war, but toward revelation. Your father did not vanish because he was careless, Adrian said, and the certainty in his voice cut through the last fragile barrier of Clara Bennett's composure. She held his gaze, searching for deception, but what she found instead was something heavier, a burden carried too long, and the forest around them seemed to breathe in rhythm with the unseen force beneath their feet. Explain, she demanded, her tone controlled but edged with urgency, because 30 years of silence did not deserve riddles. Adrian stepped closer, reducing the distance to 10 yards, enough for her to see that the silver of his eyes was not reflection alone but inheritance, something ancient threaded into his blood. He came here during the first year after the treaty, Adrian continued, when both sides still mistrusted every shadow, and he found the core awakening after the war. Clara felt the words settle into her chest. Awakening. Not resource, not anomaly, but something alive. My father was a scientist, she said quietly. He believed in measurable proof, and yet he chose not to publish what he discovered, Adrian replied, because he understood that proof can become a weapon in the wrong hands. The statement struck her harder than accusation ever could, because in the worn leather journal in her backpack she had read the same hesitation in her father's handwriting. Entries that began precise and analytical and ended with questions about responsibility and consequence. If he knew it was dangerous, why did he keep coming back, she asked. Because he believed there could be balance, Adrian answered, and for the first time his composure wavered, not with anger but with memory. Clara studied him more closely now, noticing the restraint in his posture, the deliberate calm, as though he were constantly choosing control over instinct. The council believes your presence here is a threat, he added, and there are those within my own people who would prefer this land open to your government if it meant profit and power. That means the danger is not only from humans, Clara said, her mind racing as pieces shifted into place. No, Adrian said, and the core pulsed again beneath them, brighter this time, a faint glow seeping through the cracks in the stone at their feet. Clara instinctively stepped back, but Adrian did not, and she saw something change in his expression, not fear, not aggression, but recognition. It responds to lineage, he murmured, almost to himself. Clara's pulse thundered as she realized what he implied. You were saying it. Recognized my father, she said slowly. I am saying it recognizes you, Adrian replied. The forest fell silent in the aftermath of that truth, and Clara felt the weight of 30 unanswered years shift into something far more dangerous than grief. If the core responded to bloodlines, if her father had stood here and chosen silence, then his disappearance was not an accident of wilderness, but the result of someone who feared what he might protect. She met Adrian's gaze again, steadier now despite the tremor in her chest. "Then tell me who within your people wanted him gone," she said. Adrian did not look away, but the pause before he answered was long enough to confirm what she already sensed. The fracture within his own world was deeper than the treaty itself, and whatever had happened 3 decades ago had not been buried as cleanly as either side pretended. "There are those in my council who believe peace was a mistake," Adrian said at last, his voice low but unwavering, and Clara felt the truth of it settle into the space between them like a coming storm. The late afternoon light filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, catching in the faint shimmer rising from the ground as the core pulsed again, steadier now. "Almost aware. Your council would have had motive," Clara replied, her mind already assembling timelines and probabilities the way she did in a lab. Because if her father had discovered something capable of shifting the balance between 2 species, silence would not have satisfied everyone. Adrian inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her reasoning. 30 years ago our people were divided even more than they are now, he said. Some wanted isolation at any cost. Others wanted leverage over your government, and your father stood in the middle of that fracture. Clara's throat tightened. He was not political, she said, almost defensively. He became political the moment he chose restraint, Adrian answered. The forest seemed to echo with the weight of that statement, and Clara realized how naive she had been to think discovery alone could exist outside of power. A breeze moved through the trees, cool against her skin, and with it came distant voices, not human, not close enough to identify, but present. Adrian's posture shifted subtly, not threatening, but alert. "They know you are here now," he said. Clara followed his gaze toward the deeper woods. "Your council?" she asked. "Some of them," he replied. She studied him carefully. "Are you protecting me because of the core, or because of my father?" Adrian held her eyes without hesitation. "Because if the wrong faction reaches you first, your presence becomes a catalyst for war," he said. She did not miss the fact that he did not answer directly. The ground beneath them brightened once more, the faint glow tracing the crescent carving at her feet. An instinct overrode caution as Clara knelt again, pressing her palm to the warm stone. A rush of sensation moved through her, not pain, not fear, but memory layered over memory. Flashes of her father standing in this very clearing, his hand hovering over the same mark, his expression conflicted yet resolute. She gasped softly and pulled back. "It stores resonance," she whispered, more to herself than to Adrian. "It holds imprint, energy signatures tied to those who interact with it." Adrian stepped closer, now only a few feet away. "Then you understand why some would want control of it," he said. Clara rose slowly, meeting his gaze with renewed clarity, and why others would want it destroyed. The distant voices grew nearer, still indistinct but undeniably approaching, and Adrian's jaw tightened. "You should leave with me now," he said quietly. Clara hesitated only a second before asking the question that had burned since childhood. "Did you see him the last time he was here?" Adrian did not look away. "I spoke with him the night before he disappeared," he said. The words seemed to hollow the air. Clara felt the world tilt slightly, not from the pulsing ground this time, but from revelation. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Adrian's silver gaze softened in a way that made him seem less like a king and more like a man carrying inherited regret. "He said that protecting both our worlds might cost him everything, and that if he failed, someone else would have to finish what he started." The forest fell still, and Clara understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that the someone else might be her. "The someone else might be me," Clara said before she could stop herself, and the admission felt less like speculation and more like inevitability as the distant voices in the forest grew clearer, measured, and controlled rather than chaotic. Adrian stepped closer, his presence steady but urgent. "If you remain here, you will force a confrontation before either of us understands the full truth," he said. Clara's instinct was to argue, to demand more answers, but the scientist within her recognized escalating variables when she saw them. "How far is your territory from here?" she asked. "This is my territory," Adrian replied quietly. "But there is a safer path away from the inner council." Without waiting for further debate, he extended his hand, not as a command, but as an offer. Clara hesitated only a breath before placing her palm against his. The contact was firm and unexpectedly warm, grounding rather than overwhelming. And for a fleeting second the pulse beneath the earth synchronized with the beat of her own heart. Adrian released her quickly, as if aware that even that brief connection carried weight neither of them was ready to examine. "Follow me," he said. They moved through the trees with deliberate speed, Adrian navigating terrain that would have slowed anyone else, guiding her around fallen trunks and uneven ground with minimal words. Clara noticed that the forest did not resist him the way it had resisted her equipment, as though it recognized his authority. After nearly half a mile, the glow beneath the soil faded to a faint shimmer, and the air felt lighter, less charged. Adrian slowed near a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where the trees opened into a clearing. From this vantage point, Clara could see the outer edge of her team's temporary camp nearly 3 miles away, small white research tents barely visible against the landscape. "They are closer than you think," Adrian said, following her gaze. She nodded. "My team believes the energy here could power cities without fossil fuels," she admitted. "And others believe it could grant influence beyond your government's reach," Adrian replied. Clara turned toward him fully. "Then tell me who within your council opposed my father's restraint," she pressed. Adrian's expression hardened, not with anger but with calculation. "There was a beta named Marcus Thorn," he said, respected, persuasive, and convinced that secrecy equaled weakness. Clara felt the name settle into her memory like a data point awaiting confirmation. "Is he still on your council?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian answered. "And he has grown more vocal as human investors move closer to our borders." The implication hung heavy between them. If Marcus believed her father stood in the way of power 30 years ago, then Clara's presence would reignite the same fear. Adrian studied her carefully. "If you continue this investigation publicly, you will accelerate what some already desire," he warned. Clara lifted her chin despite the tremor in her chest. "I did not spend my life chasing my father's shadow just to retreat when I finally find the truth," she said. A faint, almost reluctant admiration flickered in Adrian's eyes. "Then you will need protection from both sides," he replied. The sun dipped lower behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the valley, and Clara understood that whatever alliance was forming between them was no longer optional but necessary. Because the past had not ended 30 years ago, it had merely been waiting for her return. "You are asking me to trust you," Clara said quietly as the last of the sunlight thinned across the valley, and Adrian understood that the weight behind her words carried more than personal hesitation. It carried 3 decades of unanswered loss. "I am asking you to see the full board before you make your next move," he replied, his gaze shifting briefly toward the distant line where human tents marked the edge of his territory. Clara folded her arms, more to steady herself than to create distance. Because everything in her training demanded transparency, data, peer review, yet everything in this forest operated on instinct and oath. "If Marcus Thorn believes the core is leverage," she said, "then my team's presence is already accelerating his argument." "Yes," Adrian answered, "and he will present it to the council as proof that humans cannot be trusted to honor boundaries." Clara exhaled slowly. "Then we need evidence that my father chose restraint and that someone silenced him for it," she said. Adrian studied her carefully. "There are archives within our territory, records sealed after the treaty," he admitted. "Access to those archives would confirm who attended the meeting your father had with our council the night before he disappeared." Clara's pulse quickened. "Then take me there," she said without hesitation. Adrian's expression shifted, not surprised but assessing. "Bringing you inside our stronghold will be seen as provocation by some," he warned, "and leaving me outside leaves me exposed to both sides," Clara countered. The logic hung between them undeniable. A distant rumble rolled across the sky though no storm clouds gathered, and for a moment Clara wondered if the core itself reacted to rising tension. Adrian stepped closer, not invading her space, but close enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple. a reminder that leadership was never free. If you enter our territory, you do so under my protection and under my authority, he said. Clara met his silver gaze without flinching. I do not need protection from you, she said carefully. I need protection from the truth being buried again. Something in her words softened his posture. My mother was human, Adrian said quietly, as if offering a piece of himself in exchange for her trust. She believed cooperation was possible even when others called her naive. Clara absorbed that revelation in silence. Then you understand what it is to stand between worlds, she replied. Adrian nodded once. More than you realize. The forest around them darkened as twilight settled, and lights flickered on in the distant research camp nearly 3 miles away. If I disappear into your territory tonight, my team will report it by morning, Clara said. Then we make sure you do not disappear, Adrian answered. We move before full dark, and you return to your camp before midnight with a reason to delay excavation without raising suspicion. Clara considered the risk, calculating consequences the way she would evaluate an experiment. If Marcus learns I have spoken with you, she said, it will confirm his fears. Yes, Adrian replied, and it will confirm mine as well. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched Clara's lips. Then perhaps fear is the only thing both our worlds still share. Adrian's expression softened in response. Fear can destroy peace, he said, but it can also force truth into the open. The last light slipped behind the ridge, and Clara felt the choice settle into her bones. Lead the way to your archives, she said. If my father died protecting balance, I intend to understand exactly what he was protecting us from. They moved as the last light drained from the sky, Adrian guiding Clara along a narrow descent carved between stone and root, the forest growing denser with every step until the sounds of the distant research camp faded completely. The air shifted subtly as they crossed an unseen threshold, cooler by several degrees, carrying a faint mineral scent that Clara associated with subterranean caverns rather than open woodland. You are entering the outer ring of our territory, Adrian said quietly, not as a warning but as acknowledgement. Clara noted the way the trees seemed arranged with intention here, older growth forming a natural perimeter, their trunks spaced almost evenly as though placed by design rather than chance. After nearly 20 minutes of steady walking, the ground sloped upward toward a ridge of dark stone partially concealed by vines, and what first appeared to be a natural rock face revealed itself as something more deliberate, a carved archway subtle enough to evade casual detection, yet unmistakably shaped by intelligent hands. This is where the archives are kept, Adrian said, his voice lower now, carrying the weight of history. Clara hesitated at the threshold, aware that crossing into this space would mark a line she could not easily step back from. She reminded herself that discovery required courage, as much as data, then stepped forward. Inside, the temperature dropped further, hovering near 55 degrees, and the faint glow of recessed lanterns illuminated shelves carved directly into stone walls, each lined with bound volumes, sealed scrolls, and metal cases bearing engraved insignias. Clara felt a quiet, I'll replace her earlier tension. This is older than the treaty, she murmured. Much older, Adrian confirmed. He moved with familiarity toward a section marked by a crescent, intertwined with a vertical line, the same symbol she had found in the clearing. These records document interactions between our council and human representatives during the years immediately after the war, he explained. Clara's pulse quickened as he withdrew a leather-bound ledger and placed it carefully on a central stone table. Dust rose faintly when he opened it, revealing meticulous handwriting dated 3 decades earlier. She leaned closer, scanning entries until her breath caught at a familiar signature near the bottom of a page. Dr. Michael Bennett. The sight of her father's name in ink steadied her and unsettled her all at once. He attended a private council meeting here, Adrian said softly. Clara traced the date with her fingertip. It was the night before he vanished. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, absorbing phrases about containment protocols, resonance thresholds, and ethical containment. Then she saw another signature beneath her father's, Marcus Thorn. The confirmation settled like a cold weight in her chest. He was present, she said quietly. Yes, Adrian replied. And according to these notes, your father argued against exploiting the core's energy, stating that its interaction with lineage suggested consequences neither species fully understood. Clara swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. He believed it could destabilize more than ecosystems. She whispered. Adrian's gaze remained on the ledger. He believed it could amplify what already divides us. Silence filled the chamber, heavy but not oppressive. Clara straightened slowly, meeting Adrian's eyes with a new clarity. Then Marcus did not fear the core itself, she said. He feared losing control over it. Adrian nodded once. And if he views you as a continuation of your father's restraint, he will not remain passive. Clara closed the ledger carefully, understanding that this archive was more than record, it was motive. Above them, far beyond stone and root, the night deepened over Black Hollow, and for the first time Clara felt the past align with the present not as mystery, but as unfolding consequence. Marcus Thorn did not act alone, Clara said slowly as the implications settled into something sharper than suspicion, and Adrian did not immediately answer because the silence itself confirmed that the fracture within his counsel ran deeper than one name on a page. The chamber felt smaller now despite its carved expanse, the lantern light casting long shadows across the stone walls as if the past itself leaned closer to listen. There were others who believed the core should be leveraged as proof of dominance. Adrian admitted at last, not over your government alone, but over rival pacts who questioned our authority after the war. Clara absorbed that, her mind assembling a larger pattern, because if control of the core equaled political power, then her father's refusal would have threatened more than ambition. It would have threatened hierarchy. He was not only protecting balance between species, she said quietly. He was protecting balance within yours. Adrian's gaze met hers with quiet respect. Yes. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, steadying the surge of emotion rising behind her composure. When she opened them again, the scientist within her had reasserted control. If Marcus framed my father as a liability, she said, then eliminating his influence would secure support from those who already leaned toward aggression. Adrian's jaw tightened subtly. It would also allow him to argue that humans could not be trusted. With knowledge of the core, reinforcing fear on both sides, Clara paced once across the chamber, the stone cool beneath her boots. My team plans to conduct a deeper energy scan within 48 hours, she said. If Marcus learns that, he will use it to demand preemptive action. Adrian stepped closer to the table, resting his hand beside the open ledger. And if your government receives a surge reading from the inner zone, investors will accelerate their timetable. Clara met his eyes again, the tension between logic and instinct narrowing into resolve. Then both of us are on a clock. A faint tremor rolled through the stone beneath their feet, subtle but unmistakable, and for a brief second the lantern flames flickered without wind. Clara felt it not as threat, but as signal. It is reacting again, she whispered. Adrian nodded. It responds when conflict approaches. She studied him carefully. And what happens if it is forced? Adrian's silence stretched longer this time. We do not know. The admission was honest and unguarded, and it unsettled her more than certainty would have. Clara stepped closer to him, reducing the distance to barely a foot. Then we cannot allow either side to provoke it without understanding its limits, she said. Adrian's silver gaze held her steadily, and in that proximity, she sensed not dominance, but restraint, a leader choosing patience over instinct. If I bring this evidence to my council publicly, he said, Marcus will deny any wrongdoing and accuse me of colluding with you. Clara considered that carefully. Then do not confront him yet. Gather more than signatures. Gather patterns. Adrian studied her expression. You intend to investigate him from within your own camp as well, he realized. Clara gave a faint, determined nod. If my father sensed internal division among your people, he would have documented anomalies in council behavior, supply routes, or communication. Adrian's expression shifted, admiration tempered by concern. That path is dangerous, he said. Clara's voice remained steady. So is ignorance. Above them, far beyond stone and lantern light, the moon climbed higher over Black Hollow, and in the quiet that followed they both understood that their alliance had moved beyond curiosity into strategy, because the past had revealed motive, and motive demanded consequence. The decision settled between them not as agreement, but as inevitability. and Clara understood that the moment she stepped back into her own camp, nothing would feel ordinary again. Adrian closed the ledger with deliberate care and returned it to its carved place within the stone wall, as though restoring balance before stepping once more into uncertainty. "You must leave now if you are to return before midnight," he said quietly, and though his voice carried authority, there was an undercurrent of something more personal, a recognition that trust once extended could not easily be withdrawn. Clara nodded, memorizing the path through the chamber, the arrangement of shelves, the crescent mark above the archway, because knowledge was her armor and she intended to wear it well. As they retraced their steps through the hidden entrance, the night air greeted them cool and sharp at 50 degrees, the forest alive with subtle movement, yet holding a watchful stillness. They walked in silence for nearly a mile, neither speaking, as if both sensed that words might fracture the fragile understanding forming between them. When the faint glow of her team's portable lights appeared through the trees nearly 3 miles ahead, Clara slowed. "This is far enough," she said softly. Adrian stopped as well, the distance between them now deliberate rather than accidental. "If Marcus presses the council tomorrow, he will test my loyalty," he said. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Then do not defend me openly. Defend the principle of containment." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly in consideration. "You are asking me to argue against exploitation without revealing why," he observed. "I am asking you to buy time," Clara replied. "The core does not respond only to lineage, it responds to tension. If conflict escalates, it may destabilize in ways neither of us can predict." Adrian studied her with renewed respect. "You speak as though you already feel its rhythm." Clara hesitated, then answered honestly, "I do." For a moment neither moved, and in that stillness the boundary between king and scientist felt less defined by species and more by shared responsibility. "My father believed balance required sacrifice," she said quietly. "I do not intend to repeat his mistake by standing alone." Adrian's expression softened at that. "Nor do I," he replied. The words were simple, yet carried a weight that lingered longer than any oath. Clara took a step back toward the lights of her camp. "If my team begins deeper scans tomorrow, I will redirect them toward peripheral data collection," she said. "It will raise questions, but not alarms." Adrian inclined his head. "I will call a private council session before dawn. Marcus will not expect movement so soon." Clara paused once more, looking at him not as an adversary, but as an ally forged by circumstance. "If we uncover proof that my father was silenced to protect ambition," she said, "will your people accept it?" Adrian's gaze shifted briefly toward the darkened ridge behind him. "Some will," he answered. "Others will see it as a threat to tradition." Clara absorbed the honesty without flinching. "Then we prepare for both outcomes." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the distant hum of generators from her camp and the deeper resonance of the core beneath the forest floor. Adrian stepped back into shadow, his outline blending with the night. "Return safely," he said. Clara nodded once and turned toward the lights, aware that the next 48 hours would test more than loyalty. Behind her the forest remained silent yet awake, and as she crossed the invisible boundary back into human territory, she felt the faint pulse beneath the earth again, steady but watchful, as though the future of two worlds had begun to measure her resolve.